through your own sincerity, you're confronted with the fact that, I have to give up this precious habit or this justification for not feeling all my pain. I've been more angry about that than even experiencing some of my pain sometimes, accessing it sometimes. This idea that no, that part of me has to go emotionally if I'm going to keep growing, if I'm going to love, if I'm going to, be my personality. That's quite challenging for everybody.
And the reason why it's so challenging is because that's where most of your terror is. And most people want to avoid terror like the plague, So the reality is the experience itself is usually nowhere near as bad as the terror you have of it, right? And that's where most of us face our main issue is that we justify, through our terror, we justify avoiding the experience, right? What's the time?
Charlotte, it's 20 to 1.
21? Yep, Charlotte.
So it's about the childhood stuff.
Yep, there's stuff we had here.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't have a lot of memories about my childhood.
Most people don't.
Yeah, and I wonder how to work through that, and even today, like, my memory is really, really bad. I can't even sometimes remember the topics from the last talks. So,
yeah. Okay. So the real question is, how do I face a problem when I don't know it's there? Isn't it? I can't remember it was there. I can't remember what happened to me. How do I then face my problems?
And I think earlier I connected with some of the confusion in childhood, because I feel like there was a lot of gaslighting, and I'm also I have 2 sisters, and they are doing well, as opposed to...
Seemingly.
Yeah, I feel like I'm the only one struggling in the family, so what's...
Well, you're the only one open to sin, so, obviously. So let's look at family denial and its effect, right, in terms of on you as a little person. So you're as a child, you're growing up. This is you. I'm just trying to shorten Charlotte, but I can't. Mary and I love shortening.
Lottie. Can we call you Lottie?
No, it's not. I can't fit it in. I'll have to draw you as a bigger person. L-O-T-T-E. Is the spelling, is it for you? Okay, so there's Charlotte. Charlotte is not that big. She's a little girl at this stage, right? So a little tiny child in big mum and dad's care. Now, not a Scottish dad. Okay, mum and dad's care. So little Charlotte's in mum and dad's care. Mum and dad are in total denial about everything they're doing. Absolutely everything. Generally, that's the case. Most parents are almost in total denial about every little form of harm and every large form of harm they bring to their own children while the child is growing up. They usually have no idea. You've got to remember that these parents have been parents as long as you were a child. In other words, if they were parents, they started being parents, let's say they were in 25, and you were a 2-year-old child, then those parents have been 2-year-old parents.
If you're the oldest, yeah.
If you're the oldest, 2-year-old parents. They have as much experience as parenting as you have as being a child. Barely anything. And if you look at the history of the world, most people feel it's an offence to teach a parent how to be a parent. So they are very blunt to hearing anything from anybody about how I bring up my child, is the way they sort of say it, right? Very offended, even though they're like babies as parents, like, aren't they? They're 2-year-old parents, not very experienced parents, right? Obviously not having God's standard love, they're being brought up in the world standard of love, which remember we said yesterday was in the house. And little Charlotte has come into the world and she's in this environment. So, and it's the very first thing they are doing is denying almost everything they do, in the sense they live in a state of almost permanent denial. In the sense, I remember when I was my first child that I had, I was in a state where I didn't really know much at all about anything I was doing and how it was harming the child. I was doing my best, I thought, and this is how most parents think, but also I would have loved to have been educated, but there's no course you can go to, there's no parenting teaching that goes on planet hardly at all, and if there is, most of it's absolutely corrupt in the sense of how to bring up a child. And so these parents are on their own, basically. They're not connected to God, they don't have God's standard of love in them yet, and so they're on their own with regard to bringing you up. So I'm not saying that to make you feel sorry for them. I'm just saying this is the truth of the situation that almost every person on earth has faced, right? Little Charlotte, she's brought up in this environment. The primary divider is deny as much as you can deny, emotionally. Deny as much as you can. So Charlotte, the very first thing she learns is deny as much as she can. Deny even her memories. Deny her experiences. Deny as much as she can. Right? She's learning this from childhood.
Especially because most parents are saying, I'm defining reality. I'm defining what's...
The parents are saying they are God.
Here. Yeah.
They're saying they're God. They're saying, I am your child, I am your parent. Not God is your parent, but I am. And therefore, they're putting themselves in the position of God with you. Right? So they're already thinking of themselves as God in your life.
And they're saying, I'm taking these actions for these good reasons, and this is what is happening in our family. They're defining that to you.
Yeah.
And if you start to have a feeling or an experience that is different from what they're defining, you can see that little Charlotte has got a decision to make. It's a pretty tough decision, isn't it?
But she's having to make this decision way before she's even got an intellect to make it.
She doesn't even understand she's got to make a decision, but inside of her, she's having to decide, well, do I honour my experience, or do I accept what these big God-like people are saying is happening here?
To my experience.
In my life.
So the average child learns the way to get along with their parents is to accept their parents' version of their experience. Right? To do that, you have to deny most of your own experience. Internally, you have to shut it down. You have to distance yourself from it. And one of the ways most children learn to distance themselves from it is by spacing out to it. Like just zoning out, tuning out to what's actually happening. You know, and so this is why you see even more nowadays than even before, because there's more addictions a child can have now than before, where they start to have little video games and watching telly and they're playing games outside with other kids, and they're doing all these things that the average parents think, oh, this is good. But the main reason why they're doing it is because they're avoiding the experience with their parents and using a lot of distraction, internal distraction and external distraction. Food as well, distraction, but external distractions as well, you know, things that engage them. And whatever the parent will allow you to do is what you would have chosen to do. So in Mary's case, her parents really only allowed her to read books.
Yeah, I just read books. And then I'd get in trouble for reading books too much because I just read them voraciously my entire childhood. I figured out a system where I could read a book in the shower. I read a book at the dinner table. I got in the car. At any minute that I could, I was reading a book. And it was my way of not being there, being somewhere else.
Yeah, I did that with just being in my fantasy, and I was called out on it a lot, like just going somewhere else.
Going into a sort of mystery world and fantasy world and like friends, imaginary friends. And
I don't really remember, but just being absent, you know,
Yeah.
like sucking on my thumb, and
yeah.
I still zone out a lot today.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the first things you learn to do as a child is to zone out and use a method. Now, if whatever the method is allowed is the method you will first use, and also will be your primary method of avoiding your emotion right to this day. Right? So if it happens to be books, for Mary it's been books, right to this day, she's still reading books to zone out. right?
I don't read many books anymore.
No.
But
when we first met, it was
I
like,
used to read them all the time.
she was buying books, reading books. She's got a stack of books like beside her bed, books everywhere, and all just to zone out. For me, it was more doing things like the only thing I was probably allowed to do. Well, I was allowed to be alone, and I was allowed to go out on my own, bushwalking and whatever. That was what I was allowed to do, right? So at a very young age, like I was 4 or 5, I'd be riding my push bike kilometres away from home. My mum and dad often didn't know where I was for a whole day, and I could be alone the whole day. So mine was being alone. That was my go-to, right? My way of avoiding my own stuff. Yeah? And so I loved being alone. Mary wasn't allowed to be alone because they wanted to constantly force themselves close, hugging, while at the same time smothering, but while at the same time not wanting her to be herself or feel herself. And so books was her allowed. So it was a big thing, right? Now, all of us usually have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 allowed things that their parents allowed. And then beyond that, it was like not allowed. So, like, my parents bought a telly, and when I was little, like I was about 4 or 5, I think it was, they bought their first telly. It was a black and white thing. Back then, cartoons started at 6 a.m. So what do you reckon I was doing? 6 a.m. I actually put on the telly at about 5:40, just before 6 a.m, and there was the test pattern with a bit of music. Drove my parents nuts, right? And then from 6 a.m. to the time I went to school, I was watching telly. Right? My parents didn't agree with that, so they sold the telly. So from the time I was that age to 18, never saw a telly. So now that was stopped, but I could go out bushwalking. So that's what I did. I could also make a negotiation with my family about doing jobs for pay.
You could be industrious.
I was allowed to be industrious, in other words. So I made a negotiation with my mother that I would do the washing every week. I would do some ironing. I would clean the bathroom once a week. I would cook 3 days a week. Right? And she let me, and I got paid for it.
But was it still to get away from the truth of
Correct.
the situation?
So I learned that working your guts out is a great way to avoid. So later on in my life, what do you reckon I did? Like, I was a workaholic. Worked my guts out to avoid my feelings. Up until the time I was 33, there were some times where I'd work 4 days straight without sleep. Right? That's how much I would work, like 4 days. And I would then drive home after 4 days straight without sleep. Anywhere up to 800 kilometres after that as well. And I can remember like windows down, trying to keep cold so I could stay awake, and pulling over and having cups of coffee. By this stage, 4 days, you're hyped up, right? It's like you're on drugs, right, by that stage. And this is what I did to avoid my feelings. But I was allowed to, you see. So when I started my businesses at home, you could say, when I was 5, I was allowed to have a business. So what do you reckon I did? As soon as I got out of any education, which was electronics engineering, what do you reckon I did? Set up my own business. I wasn't one of these people who worked for somebody else for 40 years. I set up my own business because that was the thing I was allowed to do. Right?
Yeah, and for me, it was books and food.
Yep.
Food was allowed. Mum was always feeding us to suppress everything that was going on. So in my history, it was being an academic, like being studying and stuff. And I had issues with food, alcohol, cigarettes for a while. Things that I was using to avoid the truth.
Which mum and dad or dad allowed?
Yes, they weren't keen on the...
Dad was keen on the alcohol.
Yes, Dad liked it. He had a drinking buddy then.
Yeah.
But not very keen on the cigarettes. But Dad is a smoker. But what I'm thinking of for you, Charlotte, is like, I was using those same techniques. So you've got this technique of I absent myself. just go away. But I was using them into my adulthood, much like Jesus was, still to avoid the truth of what was happening in our lives. So for yourself, every time you're absenting yourself, even as an adult, you can know, I'm avoiding the truth of what's happening right now in my life. Because that's obviously, it's like these addictions, the things we were allowed to do to avoid the truth. And letting go of those addictions is going to help you with this childhood as well as your adulthood.
Yeah. So everything you was allowed to do as an addiction, as a child, to get away from things, you now will do. And the problem is that it's so natural that you barely even think of doing it. It's like, it's just normal. It's just, this is what I do. And also you feel very attracted to it because it helps you avoid feelings, right? So the question you had is, how do I connect to my memories of my childhood, which are really associated with the feelings of your childhood, right? So to connect to a memory, so if you think of a memory is a sum total of not just thoughts, but it's emotions, experiences, smells, tastes. And the memory is a very interesting thing because it combines all of the experience as a picture and a visceral experience, in the sense that you can almost, if you have memory properly, you can almost feel the pain and where it was in your body when you broke your arm, or you can feel everything because it's not just thoughts at this stage. But there's all this stored stuff that's a part of the experience. So let's call your memory your experience, right? Which is really what your memory is. And your experience is made up of your thoughts, your emotions, your sensory, even your senses, like what you saw, what you heard, how you felt, who touched you and when they did. That's all a part of this experience, right? And a lot of our experiences as children are not very pleasant, right? So here we are, we've got this experience. So let's put that down there, which is not what you're not connecting to. So you're not connecting to this experience. And you can see that if you continue the same methods you used as a child to deny your experience, can you see it's going to be hard? It's going to remain hard to connect to it. Right? So the very first thing that must be done in order to connect to an experience is to start deconstructing the methods that you were allowed to use to detune from your experience. And that's a decision you'll need to make.
Yeah, I started doing that, so stop drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes and smoking weed. I all did that in the last 10 years, but now it's the smaller things, like recently started giving up coffee. Yeah. And I think technology is a big one.
Big one too.
But
yes.
The biggest thing
See, now you're talking about grown-up Charlotte and what she did. Yeah. But what did little Charlotte do on top of that? See, she wasn't allowed to have drugs. Yes. She wasn't allowed to have coffee or get drunk. See, these are adult things we choose to do to continue the suppression. But I'm talking about, what about little Charlotte?
I wonder what she did.
Well, you've told us.
You already told us. The main thing.
Yes, it's going away. That's the biggest thing.
That drove you to drugs, that drove you to alcohol.
They're
all methods of going away.
Do it. Yeah. So this is, if you can view that going away as, it's like, say I was sitting here, guys, and I was smoking a cigarette. And I was like, yeah, I want to connect to my feelings, and it would be comical, wouldn't it, if I came here and like lit up a cigarette this morning? You'd be like, what is happening? Clearly she's avoiding Mary, not Mary. But it's like every time you do this thing where you go away, it's like you're smoking. It's like me smoking the cigarette. It's the thing that so all my things with alcohol and cigarettes were really related to the thing I was allowed to do, which was use my body to suppress, use a physical substance to suppress. And so all the food.
Started with food, of course.
It started with food, and I have problems with food. I still seek out food when I want to suppress something sometimes, depending on what that feeling is. So when you're doing this thing where you're like, oh, I've gone away, oh, I'm not paying attention, It's like you are eating chocolate or drinking coffee, or it's the same, except this is your biggest thing you did, and this is how you avoided connecting to the experience as a child.
Yeah, the desire to do the zone outs has caused you to go to drugs, has caused you to go to alcohol, has caused you to even drink coffee, and it's caused you to get so involved in technology that you forget the life. It's the desire to zone out that causes these. You could say it's the cause as to why you did all those other things, to harm yourself, instead of feel your experience. Now, of course, while, as Mary said, while you're doing the thing, the zone out, in your case, the childhood thing that you were allowed to do, while you're doing that, the experience will remain suppressed.
Yeah.
Because that's the purpose of the thing the child learned to do, is to zone out the experience. Right? So while you're doing it, the experience is not going to be fully remembered. You're not going to be able to recall it. You might have little glimpses of it occasionally, which I know you do, but you won't be able to recall the whole experience, right? And that was the purpose of the action taken by the child. The problem as an adult is you've got to reverse it in order to access the experience. If you can access the experience, now you can deal with the experience. But if you don't access the experience, how can you deal with it? You're not conscious of it, so how can you deal with it? So it's very important not to look at, see, the adult things are all good to list, you know, like the drinking and the drugs and all that, and the technology and all that are good to list. But they're not the real thing you were allowed to do as a child generally. Although in this generation of children, they are the things, you understand? But for a generation like my generation, there was no such thing as a computer, there was no such thing as a mobile phone, there was no such. We weren't allowed to use those techniques because they didn't even exist then, right? You know, some of us got to use play as our method. You know, you were always told, go out and play, go out and play, go out and play, and get away from me, go out and play. So instead of feeling the rejection of it all, you just go out and play. And it was a great way to avoid the rejection, right? And avoid the lack of interest, you know, things like that. So we were taught, you know, my generation taught different ways, but the youngest generation, like Emma's age, Elsa's age, is like your mobile phone, you've got your screen in front of you, you've got your own personal screen. A lot of Western people have right?
Sometimes you're even given drugs as a child now.
Yeah, speed, things like that. Lots of spirit addiction and all of that too, so the poor little kids get more overcloaked with spirits as a result as well.
You said speed, didn't you? Sugar. Yeah, sugar, yeah. But also children with ADHD are prescribed amphetamines. Yeah.
Amphetamines.
Yeah. I'm just clarifying what you're saying.
That's right. There's drugs like just food drugs and that, you know, like that are used to suppress emotion, but there's also actual drugs that they're actually giving children now.
Antidepressants?
To help them detune from their feelings.
So you can see that as they grow into adults, they're going to have an entitlement to a whole heap of things to avoid.
You think you've got one? Wait till this generation of children, particularly modern day children in the West, come. They're going to, you know, many people are saying, oh, it's the children that are going to save the world's problems. That's not what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is they had more problems than the average adult had when they were their age. Like, so the average 5-year-old child now has more problems emotionally than the average adult had like 40 years ago. So how are they going to solve problems? It's going to be very hard. Yeah. So the key is to access this childhood allowed methods of denial of an experience, your memories.
And to develop a desire to give it up.
Yeah. And you'll find it's probably one of the hardest things to let go of. You need to pray about a fair bit. And it'll be quite hard because it's been your primary go-to, not since a teenager, but since a little.
Yeah, and also it's internal. You know, I can't just avoid the substance.
Correct. So you can take away the substance, which I recommend people do, certainly. take away the substance, take away all of that. But if you don't deal with the thing you were allowed to do as a child, you'll always revert to that. Yeah. And like I said, for many of you, it's more than one. And for some people, young people, it can be like 25 things that they're allowed to do, which makes it even more difficult to give up.
And this is something that we want to talk about this weekend, is like, what is required to do to make these changes? You know, it's quite painful when you can't remember your childhood experience. You feel pain and you think, how can I access what I need to access to let things go? But it feels even more, if you feel yourself, it feels pretty challenging to think about giving up this is what I do to manage. I just go away sometimes. I just step out of myself sometimes. It's like we each have these kind of treasured things, if you think about it, in our life that we think, if I don't have that thing, I can't even imagine. And these are the kinds of things that are involved in developing humility, is developing the desire to give those things up. And you can't just do it cold turkey when they're internal like that. You have to have the desire to do it. Otherwise, you'll just do it, you know. But these are the things
but you can pray for God's help to help you with the desire, can't you?
There's so much help to do it.
Spirits to come and help you to have a desire.
Even remind you, oh, you're doing it, you know, what don't you want
to do?
There
you go again.
Yeah.
Having some. See, most of us get annoyed with that, but it's actually can be quite good.
Yeah. Can help a lot. But, you know, someone in another place we've been, I was talking to them about this, and they're like, oh, so you're saying there's emotions about emotions. There's emotions I've got to deal with about having my emotions.
Yeah.
And there is, all these things that Jesus wrote up before about the things that happen to us in childhood, and then the way that we cope with avoiding those you know, the potential violence and the shutdown and all of those things. They are things that we do have to deal with in order to, you know, get on with releasing our experience.
Now, there's one thing more I must say in answer to your question before we break, and that is your faith at the moment is set in such a manner that you actually like to not remember. Right? It troubles you, in the sense of you're going, you know, what am I not remembering? So that sort of troubles you. But then on the other hand, it's sort of the corrupt faith is saying, but what if I remember things that are bad? Like, what am I going to have to do then? Right? So a part of the problem we face in this dynamic is the reason why this child uses the effective technique is because the child also developed within itself a corrupt faith based on its need to use that technique. Do you understand what I mean by that? In order to use a technique, you have to agree with its usage internally. You have to desire its usage internally.
It's sort of like, little Charlotte, oh, this is terrible. I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
What is true? Oh, I'm just going to step out of myself.
And mum and dad are okay with that.
Yeah, I'm not getting in trouble for doing this.
Yeah.
Oh, then you develop the faith. This is a good thing to do.
This works.
This is effective for me.
This is good. It works. It gets me away from this bad situation. This works. This is fantastic. This is great. This is going to be what I'll use for the rest of my life. It's fantastic, is what is the internal feeling. So the desire becomes set to continue using it. And remember, desire is linked to faith. Desire is a sub-aspect of faith. And so that means that your faith has been corrupted now to the point where you're wanting to use it. So not only is there the thing itself that you use that you're going to have to address, there's also your desire to use it that you're going to have to address. Do you understand the difference? There's the thing you do, which is, in your case, zone out. Then there's your desire to zone out that's going to have to change, as well as the zone out itself. So the difficulty is going to be changing your desire to zone out rather than just stopping the zone out. It's sort of like if I'm a smoker, if you imagine I'm a smoker I'm smoking a cigarette. Now, I can stop the cigarettes, but if I don't address the reason why I needed them, can you see I'm just going to go and find another substitute for the cigarette, maybe candy, sweets, and use that as a way of zoning out, right? But if my desire is that I want to know why I'm going to the cigarettes, what does it give me, what am I looking for, and I actually feel that, now my desire to have a cigarette will dissipate, and therefore I won't use cigarettes, but I also won't use candy, or I won't use sweets. You follow?
Yeah, but isn't the reason for the desire to zone out the experience itself?
No.
No.
Not always, no. No, it's not always the experience itself. It can be your method of thinking that you have some kind of control over your life. Your method of, this is something you want, right?
The justifications.
Yeah, it's like, I'm desperate for some level of control over my experience, right? So there's the experience itself, and then there's your desperation for some level of control over it, which is driving your denial of the experience. You follow? Now, the method you use, which might be physical or emotional or even spiritual, there's some people who just go, I've reincarnated, so I don't have to deal with it now. I can deal with it next time I'm around. Or, I deserve the life I've got. And I don't really have to change it because in the past life I was, this is what some people in India feel. In the past life I was a terrible person, obviously, and this is why I'm being punished for this life. So I've just got to accept my punishment, right? Not complain about it. These are spiritual beliefs that often people imbibe to avoid the experience. And then there's emotional beliefs like, I shouldn't have to feel anything. I should be able to avoid my emotions from now on. I should be able to zone out. It's good for me to zone out. That's an emotional experience. Then there's sexual things you might do to zone out. I need to have more sex with people to make myself, have some connection to myself because I feel numb otherwise. Then you develop sexual addictions. And then there could be the physical one, like taking drugs, alcohol, all of those things. So there's all sorts of methods, but you've also got to find the faith you have that drives them all. Which is not just, I want to not know it's not because of the experience, it's because I don't want to now know it either. So one thing is your experience, the next thing is wanting to remember it. That needs to be addressed. That makes sense?
Maybe if I listen back to it,
yeah.
At the moment I feel curious about that.
Yeah, you're just zoned out. Yeah. Which is your method of dealing with something when it gets too much for you. Yeah. And sort of is, I'm gone, I can't even concentrate anymore on what's being said. Right? Very common method, by the way.
It's quite important what we're saying there, that the justification, the faith is like a justification, if you like. It's saying, this is a good thing for my future. Zoning out is a good thing for my future. Now, if I was sitting here smoking a cigarette and saying, Charlotte, I had this experience, so smoking is a good thing for my future. You would say to me, Mary, that's not even
you're killing yourself,
logical. Like, you've had an experience and now you're smoking and you're saying that you should smoke forever because of the experience. You would say no. But inside of little Charlotte, she feels like, no, zoning out is the way that is justified because of this experience. And it's the justification that is an emotion in and of itself is what Jay's trying to help you see. And the experience is painful, and you're feeling that I can't handle that pain, or it's better not knowing that pain for you, is the justification for continuing the zoning out. And that better not knowing the pain emotion is the thing to shift. Then you'll access your experience. Yeah. You're trying to access your experience while that justification of it's better not knowing and zoning out, it doesn't work, does it? You try. Yeah.
And of course, when you feel it's better not knowing, then of course you're going to be very attracted to using every addiction you can to not know. But the trouble is, you then come to the Divine Truth lecture and you hear, my drug taking is not good for me, so I stop drugs. next Divine Truth lecture. Oh, my drinking's not good. Oh, so.
He even came for coffee and chocolate.
I even come for your coffee and your chocolate and your toilet paper and everything.
Just emotion.
If you haven't heard that discussion, you need to listen. But you know, and the internal. Once all of these external methods that you're actually using as an adult are taken away from you, now you're pretty much left with the emotional methods you've used as a child that were never taken away from you. And the reason for their existence is still, I shouldn't have to feel the experience. It's good for me to avoid the experience. That's the reason for their existence. So not only are you going to have to take away the addiction, but also the motivation for it to be a reason to avoid the experience has to be gone as well.
And my experience is we got really, really angry about that.
Yeah,
about giving up those
everybody
things.
does.
That's why I'm telling you. Because most people, when you come for those things, if you like, come for them, you know, we're not really coming for them. That doesn't sound very scary. But when through your own sincerity, you're confronted with the fact that, I have to give up this precious habit or this justification for not feeling all my pain, I've been more angry about that than even experiencing some of my pain sometimes, accessing it sometimes. This idea that no, that part of me has to go emotionally if I'm going to keep growing, if I'm going to love, if I'm going to, you know, be my personality. That's quite challenging for everybody.
And the reason why it's so challenging is because that's where most of your terror is. And most people want to avoid terror like the plague, you know. So the reality is the experience itself is usually nowhere near as bad as the terror you have of it, right? And that's where most of us face our main issue is that we justify, through our terror, we justify avoiding the experience, right? Anyway, it's time to have a dinner time.